Hi everyone, and welcome to this second Ecoscenography Reading Group session. It's my privilege to kick us off today by starting to introduce myself. My name is Tessa Rixon. I am a lecturer in scenography at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. And we're joining you at 10:30 in the morning here. So whatever time it might be, wherever you are in the world joining us, welcome. So QT is very proud to be able to host this second reading group. And just before we get started, I hand you over to our illustrious host. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are joining you from today, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. So just a small note to those who are joining us in person today, we do have a microphone in the space that is picking up our crowd sounds. So today, if you're able to, just while we're doing the panel questions up here and the readings, if you're able to just keep the noise down. But then, of course, during the Q&A, we will be able to hear you and ask questions with the microphone that I have here. Wonderful. Okay, well, I might pass us over to Tanya to get us started.
Thanks so much, Tessa. And I'm actually going to go straight to Ian, who's going to do acknowledgement of country as well from where he is.
I'm coming from where it is the past. It is 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday, the 20th, here in Takaranto, an area that has traditionally been caretaken by the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis, and is now home to many Indigenous peoples, and acknowledging the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'm coming to you here as one of co-organizers around various elements of the charrette, which you'll be hearing about later, and co-director of the Climate Change Theatre Action itself. And on behalf of myself and my colleague Chantal Bilodeau, the other director of that. So I want to acknowledge all of our relations across Turtle Island here in what is now colonially known primarily as North America, where it is still yesterday for those of you in Brisbane. But back to Brisbane, back to the future, as it were.
Great. Thanks so much, Ian. And I'm delighted to be here for the second Ecoscenography Reading Group, live from Brisbane, Australia. And I just want to talk to you briefly about this reading group and what it's all about. So basically, it's a new platform for theatre makers who are interested in exploring a variety of articles, books, plays, and stories that forefront ecological ways of knowing. Each session will focus on a specific set of readings with special guests to help generate dialogue for broader discussion. So over the first and next few months, we'll be exploring eco-theatre and eco-scenography through a discussion of climate plays written by a diversity of playwrights across the globe. And last month we had 3 wonderful plays, and this month we have a selection of another 3 wonderful plays. Before we get started, I want to thank the organisations who have made this initiative possible. The Prague Quadrennial of Performance Design and Space, in which we are a PQ knowledge exchange platform, the Centre for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, the Arctic Cycles Climate Change Theatre Action Project, World Stage Design 2022, Trigger Creative, Griffith University Australia, QT, Queensland University of Technology Australia, York University Canada. And I also want to thank my colleagues who you've just heard from, Ian Garrett and Tessa Rixon and Alexandra Lord, who you'll hear from in a moment, for all their hard work that they've done behind the scenes. And a special shout out to Monique Roy, who's done the curatorial work again for these plays behind this event, and Josephine Reed, who has done the beautiful set design, especially for us, which is what you see behind us at the moment. So thank you, everybody. Let's get started. I want to introduce first our incredible panel for our October session. So we have Alexandra Lord from Toronto, Canada, who is a co-founder of Trigger Creative with Shannon Lee Doyle and Michelle Tracy, 3 next generation designers of space, bodies and light for events and performance. Alex works towards sustainability in theatre and film, most recently in the costume department for the FX television series Y, The Last Man. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us today. Next, we have Xiao Ting, who is a Singapore-based performance maker, actor, dramaturg, and interdisciplinary collaborator. She is an associate artist from the theatre practice and programmer for Practice Tuck Shop. And her work is informed by the intersection of theatre with practice-led research to advocate for social change. Recess Time was shortlisted out of 700 applications to be featured in the 2021 Social Art Award book in Berlin. In 2021, she is a co-recipient of the Experimental Micro Fellowship for Performance Space and was selected for the Asian Performing Arts Camp at the Tokyo Festival. She is now working on a digital theatre commission spotlighting a Southeast Asian food staple, fish. Thank you so much, Xiao, for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here from Singapore, and let's talk about your fish project a little bit later. Finally, joining us in situ, we have Tessa Rixon, who introduced herself before. She's a practitioner researcher in intermediate performance, digital scenography, and Australian design. As a lecturer in scenography at the Queensland University of Technology, Tessa's work promotes new modes of integrating established and emerging technologies into live performance, exploring the potentiality of authenticity within digital scenography and showcasing Australian performance design, practice, and histories. Thanks so much, Tessa, for joining us today and making this happen at QUT. So Alex, Xiao, and Tessa will help guide the discussion that will be exploring essentially ecoscenographic responses to the 3 plays. Last month, we focused on the playwrights and the content of the plays themselves. And this month, I should say, we are particularly focused on designers and theatre makers and how they are looking at those plays and how the plays might create a response that is interested in sustainable, unique, and provocative spatial experiences that forefront ecological issues on local and global scales. I'm also wanting to introduce our actors. So we have Aldrich Dugata, who is back with us this month. So thank you, Aldrich, for joining us again. We've got Miguel Usaris, who is new in the house. He is a fine arts in acting student at QT, still in first year, so that's exciting. And all our actors are joining us today. They're volunteering their time, so we're really grateful for that. Aldrich Dugata is a comedian actor, originally from Venezuela, who is currently based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And Xiao is also going to be joining us as well as part of the readings, as well as being on the panel. Great, so let's start with our plays. We've selected 3 incredible and thought-provoking plays that are part of the Climate Change Theatre Action Project. These are Dream Remember by Hanna Cormick, Listen to Vanessa Nakate by Elea Kassam, Dream Song by Heidi Cray. And we chose these texts as they address the central themes of transformation and imagination, which we thought would be a great perspective to delve into with our guest designers in this reading group series. So before we get started, we heard from Chantel last week about the Climate Change Theatre Action Project. And this week, I'd like to hear more about what Alex has been doing with Trigger Creative on the Eco Design Charrette, which is part of the Climate Change Theatre Action Project. So Alex, maybe if you can tell us a bit about that, that would be wonderful.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned in my bio, Trigger Creative is a collective of 3 freelance designers based in Toronto. We call ourselves Next Generation Designers because we're looking forward to a climate positive future through our work. And we focus on the integration of sustainability through the lens of people, planet, and profit in every design that we work on. One of the projects that we've been lucky to work on is the Eco Design Charrette, which Tanya also mentioned. This is a gathering of designers centered around the climate change theatre action plays. We hosted our first Eco Design Charrette in partnership with the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts back in 2019. This was an in-person studio-based charrette where we hosted local designers principally in the Toronto area, but we had a few participants zooming in from around the world, which was a premonition of things to come, because now we are hosting our second charrette, which is exclusively online. And it has allowed us the opportunity to extend our global participation even further. We're really excited to be gathering again online and sharing resources because the aim of these charrettes is to bring all of these designers together to share the knowledge and inspiration needed to design with an ecological consciousness. We have developed the concept of seed concepts, which are essentially the first impetus for a design concept, expressed visually in whatever way seems most appropriate to the designer and the play in mind. And these seed concepts are directly related to all 50 of the climate change theater action plays. So our goal in gathering is not only to share resources and inspiration, but to generate seed concepts for every single one of these plays during our time together. This year, we're gathering over the whole festival, so over 3 months on a bi-weekly basis, or 2 times a week. And we are organizing our own reading groups outside of this larger reading group with Tanya, which we are happy to also attend. We are discussing our design concepts and seed inspirations. And we're also lucky to join in the professional development workshops alongside students in both Australia and Canada through York University's Global Networked Learning. It's very exciting for us to know that the seed concepts that we're working on with student and professional designers will be published in a 2-part volume by the Center for Sustainable Practices in the Arts, and they will also be exhibited at World Stage Design in Calgary in 2022. So that's a little bit more about what we're doing with our Eco Design Charrette. And if you would like to reach out and join us, you can email hello@trigacreative.com. We'd love to have you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. That's so exciting. And I hope that we're going to hear more about all the different seed projects that our students are coming up with, but also more broadly, the professionals that you're engaging with this project. So we're going to get started with the first play. This is called Dream Remember by Hanna Cormick. And it's going to be performed by Aldrich, Xiao, and Miguel with stage directions read by Aldrich. And just as we do last time, we will do the play reading and then we'll have throw some questions to the panel. So actors, when you're ready.
A participatory ritual of mass dreaming, a guided visualization, a choreography, a story, or any of the things in between. Performance notes. For one or many performers, lie down and lead a guided visualization. Make it a podcast, make it a dance track, or dance it as a choreographic score, or dream it, or perform it like a play, or read it as a bedtime story. Go do it for real. Step into a lake, or ocean water, or a field, or the imagined lake of a stage. This is a flexible script. Attribute text how you wish amongst one or many. Let the text of dreaming, remembering flow, overlapping one another, if you wish, and be free for you or the audience to add your own future memories. Let the places and references be switched for your own, if you wish. Any words may be translated into first, second, or third person text. Any words may be translated into movement or image instead of spoken. If you enact this as a participatory event, ensure you build time and space for audience aftercare, a space to safely return and dry off if necessary, maybe share experiences or connect, or to sit and reflect.
We have come, gathered at the side of the lake.
And my toes are sinking into the coffee black sludge. It's cold and thick.
It stains our skin in tiny speckles up our calves.
Itching with small insects.
Holding each other's hands, or wherever we hold each other with whatever we hold with.
I think the line stretches around the whole 4-kilometer perimeter.
A full circle elsewhere. Other gatherings dip their feet in the scratch of sand before the curling lip and salt tang of waves, or pebbles that push into the muscles of your souls with insistence and enduring grace, or jagged edges that spur your step into the water.
The whole planet over, we gather, just like us who encircle this lake, to enact a ritual of dreaming. No,
Remembering.
remembering forward to what has not yet happened.
A tender tightening against my palm.
We have begun.
The very edge of the water was sharp, as an intake of breath.
And the thick silt caresses our toes as it melts off under the lapping water's tongue.
Water that gripped around the ankle, pulling gently.
Because we lingered still in the shallow.
No one leading each other, led by the lake.
So many of us, side by side.
The submerged part of your body is gliding slow into sinking, and the other part of you still rising upwards in this world of above.
Listening for the tinsel rustle and chimes of the birch leaves quivering in a channel of wind, trying to catch the half-whispers, attuning to the language.
You had forgotten. You had never yet learned, but which that dreaming part of you still half almost remembers.
Don't you feel that?
Like something, maybe not your own memory, maybe something older.
I don't know how to name it. The language was stolen, but I feel it.
You do too.
We feel it in the way the old order didn't fit, and our spirits twitched and struggled against it. We recognize when a thought approaches it, and tears and laughter suddenly spill into your mouth out of nowhere. We sense it like something
Glimpsed by the back of your head, whispered from behind the curve of your ear, together.
dreaming back or remembering forward.
At the edge of history, outside the border of imagination.
The slip of a fish threw your hand in the water, quick and gone.
Listen.
Listen,
Listen. Step deeper.
I chose this lake because it is from my homeland. By the farmhouse in the forest on the land where I was born. I chose this lake because I was thinking of learning what wild things are carried in my blood that are not disease, but memory and ritual.
To remember the scent of pine needles and the taste of birch tree flesh, the sweet blood of cloudberries, the comfort of the color of snow at the blue hour.
I'm thinking of growing out my roots. I'm thinking of letting the other roots reach in through my walls, opening cracks through which to connect. Knee deep in the water, I try to shuffle off my fear of cliché with some half joke about middle-aged bourgeois women reconnecting with ancestry. A young Noongar woman, to my right in the circle, in a calmness that lands so gently that cuts right through the clamor of my shame, says, "That's the colonizer's narrative." My embarrassment doesn't disappear, but it falls back like an echo on the shoreline.
Accept that on the way to where we are going, I will appear foolish.
That as someone with colonizer's blood mingled in my veins, there's no graceful way out of this place.
Go through the mud.
You will slip and fall, accept the dirt on your face. Some might be graceful, but not you. But keep going, stepping forwards, stepping with whatever you step with.
Because some of us in the circle don't walk.
And I don't walk well or far, and I leave my wheelchair at the edge of the lake. Not because I don't still need it. There's no miracle story here. Except the miracle that my body is as welcome in this lake as any other body, that my crutches helped lift me in the water, and when they cease to, that I'm supported by the multi-angle of arms of people around me.
And the lake itself, that we all together, and with the lake too, support any body however it needs to be supported, and holding each other up doesn't feel heavy at all. It feels like an embrace, because there is no right way to be in the lake except to be in it together. We go deeper. The shock of the water surprises sounds out of our mouths. We start to remember, or we forget to forget.
Snippets of memory dreams jumping into the air.
You say your granddaughter has gone to study earth advocacy. You say the glyphosate reparations built organic gardens for each village in how the boots of your lover tread dust from the solar farm through the house.
There's a moment where I think about turning back. I wonder if other people linger on the shore or didn't come out here into the middle of the forest to walk into a cold lake with no purpose.
Except
What?
that's the colonizer's narrative. That hope must be
Piecemeal, small, achievable, and fully laid out as a plan before you embark. Keep stepping forwards.
the cold is lifting our voices out of us, unexpectedly, at our hips.
The woman next to me starts laughing hysterically from the cold water. In between shrieks of laughter, she starts to spill out words about how she'd always wanted to keep bees, how she now tended to hives built in her apartment complex garden, free housing parts built during the climate refugee reform that sat near a ring of blossoming fruit trees that the bees would dance around each morning. And in spring, she'd sit with her coffee, watching the slow dance of them visiting the flowers, dipping heads up to their waists in yellow pollen dust. And in summer, the hot smell of the fruit in the evening would be full in the air as small children climbed and clung in the branches, throwing small fruit down to each other as they taught each other words from their own languages for the sweet tasting gifts, exchanging taste and tongue.
A whisper ripples down the line. A child over on the eastern flank of the circle has begun talking about universal basic services and the demonetization of labor.
A man to the west is remembering the patient strike, where he and other nurses and unwaged carers helped barricade city intersections, and the sick and injured stared down the unmoving cars.
Someone remembers when their company's plastic permit was revoked.
There's a secret bubbling to the south about the Robin Hood Rebellion and the billionaire bosses, bankers, and oil barons whose heads were hoisted high and their accounts drained dry.
Someone remembers the rewilding of Berlin and the surprise glimpses of the plants and predators that reclaimed the asphalted streets.
And land return and reparations running swift alongside the language reclamation, when we scrubbed the scars off our maps and gave the old names back to the land. And then we slowed down, because progress doesn't mean speed, and the wind blows around us quick like change, but our movement as a species through the day, we can slow all that right down. We slowed down. We took time. We gave time. We spent our attention, our care. We no longer counted cost using money. We no longer counted growth using money.
An older woman that I think I maybe recognize, her shawl billows up around her shoulders in the water, and she is singing the wounds of the land. To grieve what was taken, stolen, hurt. To grieve the trees empty of lichen, the snow empty of the reindeer's tread. And I didn't see those things, but I feel like they are pieces of meat carved out of my own heart. It feels like the hurt was done to me too.
We all recognize the grief we feel for the earth, that we have pretended was an empathy, but was really a very intimate and personal heartbreak.
A betrayal.
We each felt. We each were harmed by, and reaching through the water, we place our hands on the cracks in each other's hearts, and we cry together.
Salt water flowing into the cold freshwater lake.
Because both our hope and our grief must be supported together, and water under our noses.
With those petrol tasting coughs, when you almost inhale, do you remember what's beneath in the dark water under your feet? When it felt like the whole sky had been poured down into the mouth of the mountain and you lay cradled in the serene vastness. At first, it seemed uncomfortable.
But it's not uncomfortable.
just different.
We held each other and stepped forward,
Trying to dream.
trying to remember.
You talked about the solar farm dust on your lover's boots.
Great. Thank you so much, actors, for reading such a beautiful piece and giving us a rich sense of that world that that playwright has created. My first question goes to Xiao, and it is really about how I responded to the play, because I think what I really loved about Hanna's work was that she creates an incredible freedom for interpretation. So there's room there as a performance maker and as a designer to really take that play and do what you want with it. And there's also a really incredible sense of ritual and dreaming that is created through that play. So, Xiao, I'm interested in what images come up for you as a performance maker when you read the script, and how you might translate these first impressions into a performance. What are some of the ideas that resonated with you from the text?
Well, for me, as I was reading it and listening to it, I just loved it because I felt like the images were so evocative, and some of it was incredibly universal and yet really familiar. And so I really appreciated how specific it was to the locality that the playwright was writing in. And through her depiction of the space, I kind of relate it as a concretization of how we all feel with regards to the climate crisis right now. And so when I was reading it and I was thinking a lot about, for some reason, I instinctively thought as a maker, as a performance maker, my current practice in digital theater making, because I felt like this is the perfect kind of stimulant that allows us to exchange our worlds, especially because of the repeated use of the word homeland. So for example, you bring different artists together and then they can use it to share their different worlds, their homeland. And for example, in Singapore, I would probably share something in terms of how the nature that is described in the poem. What's different here is that it probably looks a lot more manicured, that it's something like a green city versus what has been shared in there, but there's still overlapping similarities. And if this invitation were to be extended to other practitioners in other parts of the world, and all this were to come together in a beautiful collage, I think that's the power of this piece of work.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think that idea of place and how you might take a play and put it in your particular place, in your particular context, is an important one. How do you stage something like this in your own city, in your own theatre? Whether is this a theatre show or a play that needs to be performed inside, or is it better performed outside? And what are the possibilities and limitations around those choices? I think is a really interesting one. One of the things that resonated with me, because when I'm reading a script, I often will, if I'm doing a stage design based on a script, I will underline or highlight things in the text that resonate with me. And often that is very instinctive. It's not something that, I often don't know why I've underlined something. I will underline on a very instinctive basis of what resonates with me as I'm reading. And I remember one of the things that I highlighted when I was reading the script was the idea of the wheelchair by the lake. And I just couldn't stop thinking about that image of this empty wheelchair by the edges of a lake. And to me, that image by itself had so much story and potential. It would almost be, I might suggest, an opening image. Whether this is actually translated into a traditional theatre context or whether this is a real lake and we're surrounding ourselves by, in this muddy kind of lake, I suppose that's then to be discussed. Moving on to Alex, as a designer, what are the parts of the script that resonated with you most, and how would you begin to conceptualize the world of the play? It would be great to hear about your design process when first responding to a given text.
Sure. I mean, it's very similar to what you just described when reading text-based work. I always try to read through any given text completely through without stopping, without distraction. So I make a huge effort to kind of turn off any music, any distractions, and even though I might be compelled by an image as I'm reading through that first time, to not stop and just get a whole sense of the piece before I go back and reread and do a similar thing that you mentioned, either underline or highlight certain things that stand out to me. So in my second reading, there were a lot of images that jumped out at me. I'll read you the ones in particular that I noted. Holding hands or something was really strong of an image for me. No one leading each other, led by the lake, supported by the multi-tangle of arms of people around me and the lake itself, unexpectedly held at our hips. So I think that when I saw these images jump out for my second reading, I became very curious about what is connecting the people, whether it's the performers exclusively or some combination of performers and audience. And I think that I'm very curious about the scenic element, the primary scenic element being some sort of chain or rope that is connecting people. And I'm really compelled by the provocation in the script that the source is the lake, and that's the thing that's pulling people. That's what's connecting them, that's what's holding them up. And so whether I would choose to finally stage this in a physical lake or on stage, or I love the provocation of trying to do it digitally, it'd be really interesting to still try to define the scenic element of this rope or this chain. And I personally find that there's meditation, there's ritual in the weaving of things, of the braiding of things, the threading of things. So I'd be really curious if there's actually an action involved of creating this rope as the piece is unfolding. And when I keep asking myself what could be the lake source, I wonder if there's some sort of biodegradable material that we can find in water that could be used for this piece. I'm particularly very intrigued by kelp fibers, which can be treated to be like a yarn-like substance. And so it could be really interesting to take one scenographic approach that is really about biodegradable materials found in waterways. But then my brain also asks this competing question of whether it would be interesting to have the ritual be purging the waterways of things that are harmful to it. So could we create a rope of plastic bags or other things that tend to find themselves in waterways, that this ritual could be about cleaning the water while still doing this meditative act of braiding or weaving. So that's where my first and second reading took me, and that's pretty true to every process with a text for me.
Thanks, Alex. That's so interesting, because I think my immediate response, and I think this is how I always start out, I probably start very realistically, like, you know, really that image of the lake with the mud. I think mud to me was another character of this play. But I think what you've really highlighted is that you don't necessarily have to have real mud on stage, right, to create that sensibility that's there in the text. And I love this idea of rope, because as a and like even thinking about what is rope can be made out of many, many different substances, whether it's a biodegradable type of rope or whether it's made out of plastic bags, and that link to ocean or water pollution and plastic islands was really interesting, and how that makes a sustainability statement that is so connected to the play, but it's not in the play. It's not like the playwright has said, you know, talked about the pollution in the lake, but that's a really great way in which a designer can essentially add to the script, visually create these kinds of other languages, visual languages that highlight and further accentuate that script. So I'm really excited by that. I feel like, Alex, you need to design it. I want to see what you do with the
I'd love
rope
to.
and all the things. Yeah. And just obviously, and the way that you came up with the rope, which was also interesting about the connection. And it was actually started with that idea of linking people together and what link people physically together. was really interesting.
Thank you.
I want to see this happen.
Maybe I'll have to do a
sorry.
seed concept on this one.
All right, great. Well, moving on. So really illuminating just to hear those different interpretations of the text, particularly for those of you that are taking part in the Eco Charrette and thinking about now, if you've chosen your play, how are you going to start to generate ideas around it? So the next text we have is called Listen to Vanessa Nakate. And this is by Alea Kassam, and it's going to be performed by Miguel and Aldrich, with Xiao reading the stage directions. And I want to note that this play requests sign language interpretation. And we actually tried to get an Auslan interpreter here today to do that with us, and we're unable, despite various attempts to make this happen, we're unable to make it happen for today. However, what I would like to propose is that we return to this play in November. We have one more reading group in November. We have a live audience for that reading group, which I think will be really exciting because this is a very participatory play, and that we stage it properly, the 5-minute play, as much as we can stage it. And we have our Auslan interpreter there for that. So this is a little bit of a pre-reading before that happens. Okay, actors, when you're ready.
Characters. Tellers and sign language interpreters. This can be one person or multiple tellers and sign language interpreters. Voices. Speaking out loud Vanessa Nakate's words. Ideally, these should be picked from the audience. You have creative liberty about how many voices or how to do this, whether you prearrange it, give the quotes to people beforehand, or invite people in the moment. It is up to you. However, if the teller chooses to speak these words themselves, they must be read out loud from a script to indicate they are direct quotes. Notes. The storytelling must have sign language interpretation. You can choose whether the sign language interpreter leads the story and the teller translates the sign language, or the other way around. This is a storytelling piece with its lineage in the oral storytelling practices shared in much of Kenya. There is no fourth wall. The tellers is not performing, but sharing. The story is brought to life as much by the tellers as the audience. The tellers should have fun, engage the audience, animate the imagery, trust the words, become vessels to the story, and listen. In preparation for this piece, the tellers should explore and research the ways in which they can bring sound and movement alive in the telling. Example, what does a locust swarm sound like? How can they recreate those sounds with their bodies, and how can the sounds be echoed and amplified when also done by the audience? Here is an invocation by one African woman to another. I share these words in the hope that they prepare the tellers in the ways they've prepared me when writing this piece.
Hadithi, hadithi.
Wait for the audience to respond with hadithi njo. It is okay if they don't, because you are teaching them how to call for stories.
When I say hadithi, hadithi, you say hadithi njo. Hadithi, hadithi, story, story, hadithi njo, story come. This is how we call for stories. And as your storyteller, I need your help calling for the story. Will you help?
Make space for the audience to respond.
Hadithi, hadithi.
The audience responds, hadithi njo. Help them if they are shy. You can use the hadithi, hadithi call and response whenever you need to energize the audience.
As most stories do, this one starts a long, long, long time ago. But we will catch it on a December day in 2018, Kampala, Uganda. On that day, a 22-year-old young woman named Vanessa Nakate was feeling very, very, very hot. So hot that she...
The teller is unable to hear the story.
Vanessa Nakate was feeling very, very, very hot. So hot that she...
The story is not coming.
The story is not coming. Hadithi, hadithi.
The audience responds, hadithi njo. The teller has a realization.
Wait. This story will not come unless we listen to Vanessa's words.
The teller invites Vanessa's words to be real.
I asked my uncle to tell me how hot it was 20 years earlier. He told me he thought it was much hotter now.
It was hot. The kind where you sweat from places you didn't even know you could sweat from. And it wasn't just the heat.
The teller makes the sound of rain and encourages the audience to join in and amplify the sound.
Let's listen to what Vanessa had to say.
It's quite dangerous to walk when it has just finished raining because you never know where you could fall in a ditch filled with water.
Vanessa was curious.
Climate change really caught my eye because in school, it's taught as something that we don't have to worry about, something that is coming in the far future. I decided to read more. That is how I found out about the Fridays for Future climate strikes.
Vanessa prepared her placard and stood outside the Ugandan parliament on strike by herself for hours.
Seeing millions of young people from different parts of the world doing these climate strikes was very inspiring for me because I knew that I wasn't alone.
She went back the next Friday, and the next, and the next. By then, she was no longer standing by herself.
At first, I thought I was fighting to save a tree. Then I thought I was fighting to save a rainforest. Now I realize I am fighting to save humanity.
Hadithi, hadithi.
The audience responds, Hadithi and Joe.
Then,
The teller makes the sound of a locust swarm and encourages the audience to join.
Locust invasion in East Africa is threatening the availability of food. They have come after the torrential rains.
The teller increases the volume of the sound of the locust swarm.
How can we achieve zero hunger if climate change is leaving millions of people with nothing to eat? We are going to see disaster after disaster, challenge after challenge, suffering after suffering if nothing is done about this.
Vanessa Nakate had something to say.
There was the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, in January, where myself and other climate activists took the personal decision to sleep in tents as a statement to global leaders and governments. We wanted leaders to know that they have to make uncomfortable decisions like giving up on the fossil fuel industry. The people and planet must come first.
Vanessa was one of 5 climate activists on the Davos stage speaking, but in the photo that came out after, there were only 4, all European, all white.
You didn't just erase a photo, you erased a continent.
But Vanessa Nakate refuses to be silenced. Hadithi, hadithi.
The audience responds, Hadithi and Joe.
Listen to Vanessa Nakate.
Historically, Africa has only contributed 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Countries in the global south are suffering the most as a result of climate change, but have contributed the least. And yet, money still pours in from abroad to fund the burning of fossil fuels in Africa. Breaking news, we cannot eat coal or drink oil.
Hadithi, hadithi.
The audience responds, Hadithi and Joe.
Listen.
To truly understand this problem, we must listen to the voices of those suffering, both around the world and at home. Everyone must be involved in the process. We can all do something. We can rewrite the story.
Hadithi, hadithi.
The audience responds, Hadithi and Joe.
You want to know how? Listen to Vanessa Nakate.
Young women are the light this world needs right now. Young women are the solution the world needs right now. There is power in our voices. There is power in our activism.
Listen to Vanessa Nakate.
Great. Thanks so much, Aldrich, Miguel, and Xiao, to performing that for us. And I'm really looking forward to doing this again in November, where we can have audience participation, because I think this will be such a fun play to perform because of its call and response technique. And what I really like is the way in which the playwright uses this Kenyan oral storytelling tradition to engage the audience, and how that will open up opportunities for participatory staging. So, Xiao, as a performance maker, how do you imagine staging this play with an audience in your home country of Singapore, for example?
I mean, for me, when I receive a play like this, or when I started reading it, I find it very helpful to read what the playwright has designated. So actually, it's to first find out about how to best translate the context, because it is specifically situated within the storytelling practices in Kenya. And that's actually what I did when I received the play, was to find out more about that. And I love that it was associated with community, it was associated with ritual. And then whenever I get a play like this, I then ask myself, who is the key player here? What is the first thing that I gravitate towards, you know? And then I thought, it's the use of voice, obviously, because it's storytelling traditions. And so I started imagining this in Singapore, and how do we use, for example, found spaces to activate and amplify voices in the community? So in Singapore, a large majority of us actually live in public housing. And there are these massive, like, multi-story flats. And what's beautiful about these places is that they have these car parks, these undercover car parks, that has this beautiful echoey sound. And so you don't have to speak very loudly, but it creates a very nice reverberation. So I feel like this is a kind of work that can actually take place within the community and make use of the architecture to bring out the rhythm and the story behind a piece of work like this. And I absolutely love it. The other thing I thought of actually was, who would love to hear this story? Who is this story for? And somehow I associated it with theatre for young audience, because I feel like this is a perfect piece to use in a classroom as a starting point for, I think, upper primary, upper secondary, lower secondary, to begin investigating the stories behind this. And who knows, they may use this as a base to continue creating in their own classrooms and go on their own research project and maybe write their own version of something like this.
Thank you so much. That is so interesting. I love the idea of found architecture as a resource for the play, and also place specific. Again, we're talking a bit about place and how we translate these plays in relation to place, because that's a big part of how we think in a sustainable way, right? The first thing often to work as a sustainable designer is to respond to where we are here now and what opportunities we have. And I think that's a beautiful one, because you're really saying something that is accessible. It sounds like it's accessible for many people. It exists. And I agree, the idea of sound being the key player here is a really beautiful one, because we didn't quite get into that with the play reading, and hopefully in November we can explore that more. But the idea of the sound of the rain featured very strongly, and the sound of the locusts and things like that. In these kinds of plays where we have sounds and things like that, we can actually think about spaces for sound. And next month, we'll be exploring spaces for sound and light. We'll be talking about light and sound. So this is actually a really nice precursor in terms of that kind of thinking. So that's great. Already really wonderful ideas there that people can take on board for the people that are engaged in the eco-charrette in terms of how they might begin with a play. So Tessa, this is a question for you. As a designer, what kind of environment might you envision for this piece? What mediums might you use to enhance the performativity and interactivity of the play with its audiences? And how might you pay tribute to the historical events that inspired the play? It's kind of in the subtext more than anything else. And it's interesting how if we talk about the subtext in a play, it's all the language that is not written, it's around the play. It might be in the stage directions, but it's not always there. But that is often something that a designer can respond to.
Thank you, Tanya. It's so wonderful hearing that response from Xiao as well, because I think in my own context in Australia, I was definitely sort of thinking along the same lines in terms of found spaces, community spaces. And one of the key lines or directions in this that really stuck out to me from a design perspective was actually in that opening. There is no fourth wall. The teller or tellers, it's not performing but sharing. The story is brought alive as much by the tellers as the audience. The teller should have fun, engage the audience, animate the imagery, etc. So I think that really stuck out to me. And the first thing that I thought of was, okay, well, this can't be, my first instinct was this can't be in a traditional theatre space. It needs to be in a shared community space. And I think potentially being Australian, my first thing was, well, the pub or the bar or something like that, where there are, and I was sort of, where you go and you have a drink and you converse and you share lives, you share stories, but you also argue about things. And so, and I was thinking about why that was my first instinct. It's also because I think we actually had this question come up in the last reading group in terms of how do you get people who aren't just your standard. Basically, how do you stop just preaching to the choir when it comes to eco design and eco performance, and how do you bring other people on board and in? And I think we had the wonderful response from the panel that was about making it fun, making it accessible, making it personal. And I'm imagining, having that sort of shared experience where you have food, you have alcohol, you are out somewhere public, and it becomes less of a performance and more of a conversation using these words. So really leaning into the audience participation in that sense. And so I was thinking about this. That was sort of my first initial response in that sense. And it's something that could be staged anywhere. And then I started thinking about the ideas of truth and authenticity and the very heavy focus in this play in terms of that. It's called Listen to Vanessa Nakate. It's about, of course, her erasure from the Davos photograph, which I went and had a look at, and it's a really amazing image. And as soon as you look at it, you can see straight away how they've cropped her out of the left-hand side of the photograph. And the justification from that, I think it was from AP or Reuters, was that the person who was doing it wasn't aware of who they were cropping out of the photograph, but there's also a building behind her. And so they've framed the photograph so it's a little bit more visually appealing in terms of sort of photographic composition, which is really interesting that won out over potentially asking this very simple question of why is this other person standing with people like Greta Thunberg and others, and maybe potentially are they also, as important as these other 4 white European women in that photograph. And so the idea of that, so much of the text is about listening to Vanessa Nakate, listening to her voice. And I'm like, okay, well, the other alternative is how do you make her, the real woman, the real activist, her real words, her real voice, her real image, really present in the work. So I started thinking about the authenticity of bringing in her voice and doing that in a more theatrical context, and thinking about the idea of the staged authenticity of theatre. That theatre, they talk about, there's this wonderful quote, they say theatre is the most authentic thing because it embraces how fake it is, and it can be so real and produce such an authentic moving experience because it owns its fakeness. And so being an intermediate designer as well, then started thinking about, well, if you could bring an audience into a black box space, if you could through media hear her, because Vanessa Nakate has countless tweets and YouTube videos, and her voice is just out there. And so literally listening to her voice, whether that's pre-show, throughout, afterwards, having her face present in the space through digital media or even print media, whatever it might be, and just really making her present. And then, because, we sort of end on this call in terms of how important young women are in that space, branching out from just her voice and her face and her words, and sort of opening it up to this next generation of female activists. And so I thought, in terms of if you were to go with a more sort of staged version of the work, that might be a way of doing it. But the whole thing necessitates a reconfiguration of the audience. They need to be brought into the space. It can't be traditional frontal performance. So yeah, and that's, I think, sort of where that took me.
Great. These are both really amazing responses to this piece, and I think both Xiao and Tessa talked a bit about research, just very briefly, about when you receive a play, what are some of the things that you do. And I think particularly with this play, this is based on a real political context, something that happens, something that was very present in the media. And I think it's impossible for you to kind of reach into this play and think about it before going in and looking at that media context, trying to fully understand where this playwright is coming from, because this is in many ways, it's a form of staged activism. I see this very much as an activist play. And what I do love about it, which goes back to what we were talking about, the fun factor in performing eco performance, is that there's so much heaviness with this content and the real context behind it. And yet it is performed with such lightness. To me, the way that I see it being performed is there's this sense of participatory engagement and lightness and heart in addressing such a hard and difficult topic, right? In terms of also systemic racism, all of that stuff is in there in the subtext around this topic. So how do you address these big issues, climate change, racism, all of that kind of stuff that is difficult to navigate and difficult to often talk about with everybody? Perhaps with some people it might be easier to talk about than with others. But if you were to bring this into a public space, how do you make that accessible and engaging and subversively engage people in that topic? So which is kind of going back to what I was mentioning in the last reading group about, I use a lot of subversive tactics, for better or for worse, in the way in which I do my ecoscenography. I thought also, Xiao, what you mentioned about audiences is really important. Like, who are we, particularly if audience is part of this performance, who is the audience and how do we engage them? So I think that's great. We could talk about this for a long time, but we need to move on to the third play. So this is Dream Song. It's by Heidi Cray, and it's going to be performed by Miguel and Xiao, with Aldrich reading the narration. Actors, when you're ready.
Characters: Az, male, 11. Barry's best friend, science nerd. Barry, female, 12. Az's best friend, tomboyish. Notes: the kids can be played by adults. Multiracial casting is supported, but Az and Barry are preferably not white. A slash indicates where the next speech begins. The California coast near small town in the Redwoods. August twilight. The sound of distant fire shifts into lapping ocean waves. On the shore stands Az, 11, facing the water, sing/chanting to something deep below.
Grow, grow like rainbows, grow like moonbeams, grow like love.
Barry, 12, enters running.
Az, there you are. We've been looking all over. What in hell are you doing?
Hi, Barry.
Hi, Barry, you piece of... Got everyone worried sick looking. We're supposed to be packing, and this is how you spend our last chance to hang out, staring at the sea?
We'll see each other again.
Insta doesn't count. Long way from Oakland to Michigan.
That's why I have to bring her out tonight.
Who?
The creature. My Lito was the last to see her. A summer night like this, when he was just my age. Ma told me, like he told her.
Oh, hell, Az.
The night he had to migrate from his family's home, he saw the creature, gave him courage for the journey, called her the Dream Saver. We call her out from the water now. We'll get what we need to go on.
Smokes really got to you this season, huh? I know we're dealing with a lot, but...
Just has to be a good enough cause, and we'll see her magnificent, ancient neck rise up.
Thought you were into science, not this crap.
Cryptozoology has a lots of scientific basis.
Come on, Az. Your mom's going nuts.
She should know I'm here. This full moon, electric air, our great need tonight, the conditions are just right.
Right for what? My dad's out fighting this fire. We lost our house. I'm sleeping on your floor. Tomorrow, I gotta go live with my aunt and start a new school. Are you listening?
Yes. Ma lost her shop. Fire's taking everything. They're evacuating our whole town.
Welcome back to the living. So let's get back.
We have to call her out now to get our home back. Stop the fires, not just here. All of California, the whole Northwest.
Why stop there? Ask Dino the dragon to stop the droughts, hurricanes, bring world peace.
Now you're getting it.
Are you losing it?
Beryl,
Azure.
we can be whatever we have the courage to see. And if we see it with clear eyes, ask for it with brave hearts, and she approves,
She'll make all our dreams come true, like some fairy godmother under the sea.
not exactly, but if she shows herself, we'll know our dreams are possible. We can pull together and maybe have the courage to keep going. If you're not willing to try, leave me alone. You're killing the vibe.
Okay, I'll be quiet, but I'm not leaving without you.
Don't be quiet. What's the future you want? Come on, imagine. See it.
This is such a... All right. Dad and I get our house back, like you said,
Good. And?
and my aunt in Flint can trust the water again. Everyone gets clean water.
Keep going. What else?
And I don't know, the fires stop raging so we can stay here. Everyone has a job and we take care of the ones who can't work. Grown-up leaders and rich people stop playing games with our planet and us. Nobody's hungry. Nobody has to leave their home, but when they do, they're welcome where they want to go. We get the global temperatures down, like Miss Thatcher said, so the polar bears stop drowning and nobody's sick. The air's clean,
Grow,
ice caps stop
grow
melting,
like rainbows.
rainforests stop burning,
Grow like
islands stop
moonbeams.
washing away, people
Grow
like
like
us
love.
make a difference,
Grow.
and they treat us like we matter.
The oceans start to churn.
What's that?
Don't stop. Keep seeing it and sing it with me. Grow,
Grow,
grow like rainbows.
like bows,
Grow like moonbeams.
grow moonbeams,
Grow like love.
like this is bold.
Grow.
The sound of earth crackling, water rushing.
What's happening? Earthquake?
You're safe. Keep singing. Creature of the deep.
Grow,
We're united
like
in our dreams.
rainbows,
Committed
grow like
to make them
moonbeams,
true.
grow like
Are you
love,
sure if we have a chance?
grow,
That it's
grow
possible
like
to teach
rainbows,
the world to
grow
love
like
the world
moonbeams.
so we can all heal?
An eruption like a chasm opening, singing stops.
Look,
I am.
Their eyes lock with something beyond.
It's giant.
perfect. Look at her neck.
It's glowing. What's it gonna do?
Thank you, creature of the deep. We welcome you and your great wisdom.
A giant splashing, the children duck.
It's gone.
She did what we needed.
What? It just showed up and left? Can't even prove it was here. Did that happen?
I know what to do now, and I know we can. Help me.
Well, of course.
Could take a lifetime.
So, how do we start?
Their eyes stay with the sea, forever changed.
Great. Thanks so much, Aldrich, Xiao, and Miguel. I love how this play provides so much opportunity for imagination and transformation in terms of staging. I think it really captures the imagination of our childhood selves, and it conjures up this notion of the impossible and how our imaginations can be so much of a part of our reality. And the staging also is part of really capturing that rich environment. The way that the stage descriptions are part of that text really speaks to that. So my first question is to Alex. Do you have any ideas of how you would portray the world of Dreamsong and the characters of Az and Berry? What clues are in the script that might inspire a particular scenic and costume approach? And how might sustainability be included as part of your concept?
I really think that my response to the play is very similar to what you said about the childlike wonder. And so I really want to have that spirit be part of the play. And I'm most curious about how adults can also tap into their childlike wonder and their ability to persevere despite all odds. So I think that my first indication from the script directly comes in the stage directions that the kids can be played by adults. And I really want them to be adults. I want them to be adults who are dressed like kids and move like kids, but they're clearly adults. And I think it would be interesting to work with backlighting the performers for a lot of the performance so that we're really focusing on their silhouettes and their movements until the very end, when I would really like to use a front light that is quite harsh to actually show their faces as aged and weathered. So I want to try to like see the child within the adult. And I think the indication for that comes from one of the last lines of the play, which is that work like this could take a lifetime. And so I kind of want to see the child within the adult just at the very end there. And I think that this effect of very distinct lighting could also be supported by projection and how the scenic space is organized. So I think in order to support this first urge, I would want to keep the stage pretty barren, and except for potentially haze evoking the forest fires. And that could be used as a projection surface as well. I see in my mind that when the dragon is summoned, there's like a small space that opens at the back of the stage, and there's like a flood of projection that comes out and onto the floor of the space and like maybe seeps into the audience. So this could be the water, and we could use lighting and projection and the haze to grow rainbows and moonbeams and really work on this kind of fantastical environment that is being built in this barren landscape. And so I'd like to see the barren scenic space with these overburdened bodies, like perhaps the kids' clothes, like they're wearing lots of their clothes as if they're wearing everything they own. And maybe it's like a little bit over exaggerated in the silhouette. And yeah, I would want to play with that tension of the child within through this sort of exaggerated concept.
Great. Love it. I love your ideas, Alex. So cool. I think that it's really great, again, to see you thinking about lighting as part of scenography. And I think what you've really spoken to in your response is that notion of transformation, because essentially we've named this reading group month focus on transformation and imagination. And that's exactly what you're talking about in the sense of how you can use scenography in different ways to transport us into different scenes, to change the space, just using light and projection to do that in a very minimal way. Wonderful. So Tessa, as a designer who works in intermedial performance, what kind of ideas might you consider for the staging of the dragon appearance in the play? And how might sustainability be integrated into part of your process?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, Alex, that was a lovely response. And I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of like sort of my initial thinking as well. Although I love the idea of having the children played by adults. That's a fabulous dimension to it. I think the first thing that really stood out to me was that it needs to be, it can't be too overt. It needs to be obscured. There needs to be a lot left up to the imagination of the audience as well. Like I don't see any space in here for any literal projection of anything, because that would just sort of, we can do a lot better jobs in our heads than we can with projection or other types of media. And so actually, and this is sort of where I married up with Alex there, in terms of when I was thinking about the space, I was imagining, yes, very simple forms. And for some reason, the first thing that occurred to me was that the performers could be raised up higher than the audience, and the audience is in the deep, in the ocean, and the performers are looking out sort of past the audience's heads to sort of see out into the ocean. And so the appearance of this creature actually happens from behind the audience. And so there's some sort of very simple sort of levels going on in the space. And again, similar to Alex, we could use very soft projection to sort of make the space come alive. I think looking at this, and for some reason I wrote down the terms like gentle video, soft projection. Like I think it's just that idea of not wanting to try to do too much in an intermediate approach in that sense, but having that projection being cast from behind the audience onto the set and onto the bodies, and so it could completely transform that space as that sort of, that invocation begins to work and that the creature finally appears. And I was thinking about the what that would look like, what the materiality of the projection might be, and that I don't have a clear answer for that, but it did sort of start to make me go down a train of thinking about how we source and create our projection content or whatever video content we might be using, and if there is some more sustainable approaches to that, or using materials for that, capturing, filming, photographing materials that have a connection to, just as we with our physical set and our physical costume designs, reconsidering the materiality of that for a sustainable approach. How can we do that with projection or any other form of intermediate content? So I'm thinking in terms of recycling digital assets that you've made for other works, not expending the energy, whether that's literal electricity or human energy or petrol energy to go on location and to film, but to recycle things you've already made, to physically create things and then film those things. And so you're actually sort of connecting the materiality of the projection content to the set or the costume or whatever it might be. And so just sort of configuring how we think about digital media in that sense. And so I think that would be an interesting in terms of thinking about what that projection material would look like. That's the train of thought that I would go down in terms of what, and the text does give us a brief hint at a context in terms of mentioning Flint. So we sort of know, we could potentially assume we're based in the States in that sense. And so there's potentially some physical visual things we could draw on there for that. So yeah, so no real clear answers for that one, but just it sort of did take me down a few trails of thinking. Yep.
Great, thank you so much. I think it's really interesting just to think about spatial relationships in terms of where audience is configured in relationship to where the performance is. So I think that's something that if you have the opportunity as a designer to be able to think about where audiences are placed, sometimes you don't have that opportunity, but when you do, it's really exciting to rethink that, because we, often when we think about stage design, we think about that traditional proscenium arch theatre, but we also know that there are many different forms of designing for the stage, and it's exciting to be able to explore them. And I think it's also interesting to think about your notion of recyclability in terms of how do we think about recyclability in a digital context? Because when we think about recycling, we're often thinking materials, that's generally how we think, but we can also think about recycling as a way of recycling our own work, or perhaps being offered work from others to reuse. And also I think you talked a bit about human labor as well as that cost, that human cost in making performance, and how we might be able to recycle things to help us along as well when we're making things. So that brings us to the end of the official panel and play readings. And I want to thank everybody for being part of that, the actors and the panel members, and those of you that are online and in the room. And now we're going to open up to the floor, to the audience who are online and also here with us here in Brisbane, and to see if you have any questions for us. So I can now see the screen here. So if you have a question, I'll be able to see that. So as you're having a bit of a think about that, and last time I did ask the actors a little bit about their experience of performing the plays, and I might do that again if that's okay. I might ask Miguel to have maybe just tell us a little bit about what it was like to perform them and which play you resonated with the most, for example.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's right.
Do you
It's
want me
fine.
to-
You've got your own. All good.
I guess how it felt performing, I think, well, first off, I think I'll just say the one that resonated with me the most was, I think from like a performing like perspective, like I found listen to Vanessa Kate, like just thinking about like, you know, all the audience interaction would be so much fun, you know, as an actor, because, you know, traditionally it's sort of like you're playing to your like other actors and it's like the audience is there to watch. And I just absolutely love having that feeling of like really like getting the audience engaged and making sure every single person is like part of the story. And I think that's something I'd like love to like, you know, like try out and do for real. I think the first play was so, yeah, just like the image and the poetry was like so evocative, especially for me, because like I also like write poetry in my spare time. So it's just like, just feeling like, you know, the invocation of being in a lake, like through the words, like was so visceral for me. And the third play, just like the feeling of like jumping back into a kid and like having this imagination of like, you know, what does this creature look like, you know, all these like, and what is the hope that like that creature invokes in me, like as just like a person, not even just as this character, like, you know, performing it, were like things that really resonated with me as I was doing the readings for these scripts. Yeah.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Xiao and Aldrich, is there anything that you want to add about reading those plays?
Sure, I can add something. When reading the first play, what I appreciated about the first and the second was the participatory nature of blurring the lines between audience and actor. And then that made me think about how that could be incorporated into design, so that there isn't that distinction, particularly because both pieces are talking about community and wholeness. So that was really interesting to me. The first piece, upon reading it, it's part poetry, but also part stage direction. Particularly, there was a part where we, as the actors, were reading rather quickly, and the verse told us to slow down, and was written in a way where we had to take breaths and we had to slow down. And I thought that was really, really cool. How, as part of a ritual, we are also experiencing the text for the first time in like this novel way each time we read it. I thought that was really interesting. With regard to the last text, because the first two were quite participatory, I wanted to think of how the audience could be immersed into the text as well. And so actually, I really appreciated what Tessa had to share of literally making the audience into the like the water. That's a very cool idea.
Xiao, do you want to mention anything?
Well, I think I resonate with what they've already shared. But for me particularly, I think it was simply that the three of them, what they had in common was the sense of wonderment instead of fear, the sense of hope instead of death and threats. And I actually feel like that voice is very prominent, and that passion and that love I can feel just by reading their words. And then the second thing, I don't know if this is tangential, but this is the first time that I'm doing a play reading across Zoom in 3 different contexts, 3 different countries. And that was just hearing the different voices. I thought that was a really interesting experience as well.
And yeah, I think that's great. I think we need to acknowledge again, like we did last time, that these actors have never met before, as long as, at least as much as I'm aware of, and they were just here for the tech run an hour earlier just to make sure mics were working and that everything was working. So it was very much a cold read across Canada, Singapore, and Australia, which is very exciting. So I'm just seeing if there are any questions from online. What about in the audience? Does the audience, the physical audience, have a question? Yes. Yes, I might need to just move and give you the mic.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Michelle. I was just wondering, a lot of these pieces are especially, like, they're obviously all about the ecoscenography of the piece and things like that, but I think they each have their own very individual meanings and other things that are important within these pieces. And especially I work a lot in costume, and so when in regards to the material things like your staging and your costume, how important do you think it is to be super obvious about the sustainability of those things, or is it actually more important that the staging and the costume support and just have their own quiet little sustainable practices behind them? You know, like how important do you think it is to sort of have those obvious sustainability things, and where does it start becoming a bit preachy to the choir sort of boundary, I think?
I think this is a really interesting question. I might invite Alex to answer it if you're game.
Of course. I think it's a really good question, and I think that it is probably dependent on the play you're working on and your intended audience. I, for one, see strength in both approaches. I see strength in like really highlighting your sustainable choices in production, in your aesthetics that just speak for themselves on stage, and making that a focal point of your conceptual work. But I think that the play needs to support that. I think that your audience needs to be ready for that and excited about that. So I think that that's something you would want to collaborate on directly with your director and your producing partners, to just be sure that that's the strongest note you want to hit and that you're hitting it well. I think there's equal strength in being invisibly provocative in your approach in production. And I know that sometimes it sells even more the concept of sustainability if it is sort of invisible and people can't tell that you've made all of these huge efforts to work in different ways. And I think for that to hit the strong note that you would want it to in a particular context, you would probably want to highlight it in your program or outside the theater or performance space as some sort of like behind the scenes peek at how the work was done. So I think that when I'm working sustainably, I'm thinking just as much about the aesthetic experience in the play as I am coming into the theater, reading the program, question and answer periods after the show. And if you can think about what's going to have the biggest impact for your audience within the intention of the piece you're presenting, then you'll make the strongest point that you want to.
Thank you, Alex. That was amazing. I think I want to springboard off what you were saying there. The idea that, you're talking about, we have to somehow, we're not, what I'm trying to say, I don't think we're at a point yet where we can completely hide the efforts to be sustainable in performance. And so even if it is, and I think there's something beautiful about, we can do a design for the importance of being earnest and still have a sustainable approach, even if it's not completely visible on stage, having that information come through in the programming notes. And so afterwards you walk away and you just enjoyed, your traditional performance of Oscar Wilde, and you read those notes. And I think there's a power to that as well. And I think that's something to highlight Tanya's work and your book as well that's coming up, is seeing the diversity of different ways to approach ecological work. The pieces that if you're watching it, you wouldn't even know, and you find out afterwards. I think there is a sneaky power to that. Not that we have to hide what we're doing or that we need to be that subtle at times, because I think this sort of approach calls for all types of approach, all types of aesthetics and approaches, and just so we can keep shouting out the message in everything that we do. But there is something really beautiful about those works that seem like traditional performances, and then you find out they're actually being powered by batteries that have been charged by local members from the gym, which is an example I know that you talk about. So I think we have so many mechanisms, and we'll pull all of the levers until we start getting the message starts getting across.
Great.
I think for me,
Thanks.
If I were to, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Xiao.
Just wanted to springboard off Tessa. I think for me, in response to something like this, it goes back to what I personally believe in, which is it goes back to the culture of the makers. So in the sense that there needs to be time and there's labor involved in getting like-minded people when they're working, regardless of departments, as long as they believe in a certain practice and a certain culture and sustainability, they end up talking to each other to make that happen. So internally, I think that everyone is an advocate. So even if it's not as obvious to the audience and it doesn't feel very preachy, and that invisibility that you guys talk about, anybody that approaches any maker from the piece of work will know fully the ecological principles behind it. And I think that kind of expands out one way or another as well.
Great. We actually have a question from the online group. This comes from Carol Stevenson Roy, who says, I like Alex's point about extending the concepts of sustainability beyond the performance. I think there is power to keep that conversation going after the performance. What are some interesting ways to do that? And Alex, do you want to, if I could throw it back to you because it's actually on your point, that's okay? Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I've been thinking about this a lot myself. And I would say that one of the things I'm really curious about, and it actually refers back to my instinct about the first play, and I'm super curious to integrate new materials into theater, because I think theater is a great place to test things for the real world. So if we wanted to feature a material like kelp fibers or mushroom bricks in our designs, then we could actually connect with these organizations that are creating these new materials that might one day become part of fashion and architecture, but could have a really cool platform through theater. And we could partner with these innovators and we could promote their work, and we could have discussions outside of the play about what these materials could be used for in our lives. So that's one way that I see the potential for theater continuing a conversation or starting a conversation that can extend beyond the theatrical experience itself. And then I think like that is suited always to the play and the context. That's really important. And then there's other ways that you can do it, I think, through just engaging in community work through your plays. So I also think the second idea I had for the first play about using plastic bags or some other material to weave these scenic elements, we could be promoting where we source this waste from and where we diverted it, and how we're going to properly try to dispose of it and promote sort of community practices through our collection practices for the materials used in the design itself. So whatever we learn as designers, we can then create an info session after the play to say, hey, citizens, if you want to also try these practices in your life, here's what we learned. And please, build on what we've established here as a first effort and carry it on into the rest of your life. So I think, once again, similar to my response to the last question, it depends on what the pieces you're working on and what the context is you're presenting it in. But there's so many ways to think about the play as a rehearsal for real life and continuing a conversation beyond the theatrical experience.
Thanks so much, Alex. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and discussions. It's really exciting. I think we actually covered quite a lot of ground in a short space of time. So it's actually time to wrap up now. I really want to thank all our panelists and our actors for all the beautiful reading that they've done. I also want to also do a shout out to everyone behind the scenes. That everything that is happening right now is because we've had people doing all the technical production. So thank you very much for that. And basically, we've got one more event left, which will be in November. And if you've signed up for this event, you'll get the details sent to you for the November event. We'll be focusing on light and sound. And we'll be discussing similar kinds of ideas around how we respond to the plays as designers. So thank you very much for joining us. See you later.
Thank you so much for tuning in to our reading group session this month. Unfortunately, our in situ video was the only recording that we got for our October session. This will be amended for our future discussions. We invite you to stay up to date with our ecoscenography website, as this is the main platform where we discuss any future events that we will be hosting, as well as the opportunity for you to register through our Eventbrite links. This is a great opportunity to access any of the materials we will be discussing, whether it be plays, scripts, texts, as well as attending the live event. You have the opportunity to partake in a Q&A with the panelists of that session. So we hope that you consider coming to our next session, and we'll see you soon.